Hello everybody. Over the last year or so, I've been really into portable emulation handhelds made for playing retro games. One of my favorite of these devices is the Miyoo Mini Plus. It's just a very well-rounded device with amazing community support. I highly recommend it as a starter device and if you're just getting into the hobby. So here I have all 4 color variants to help you choose a color, and later I'll demo some of the great firmware options that are available. So let's start with the white one, which was the first one I personally purchased. Note that this version has a gray D-pad and multicolored buttons. The shell is white, but I think it used to be whiter and seems to have faded a little bit. All the colors have matching back buttons to the shell color too. The next color I bought was the gray, but it's kind of a brownish gray. This one also has a gray D-pad, but 2 black X and Y buttons and 2 purple A and B buttons. When I saw photos of this, I thought it would be a similar gray to the original Game Boy, but it's definitely different. For example, I think the gray color that Ambernick uses for their similar RG35XX matches the original Game Boy a little bit better. Next up is the translucent black color, which is see-through all around, so you'll be able to see the battery and the PCB underneath. The D-pad is black on this one, and the buttons are the same multicolor as the white version. The last one is this neat translucent purple. Just like the black, it's see-through all around, but since it's lighter than the black color, you can see the PCB even better. This also has a black D-pad, but the A, B, X, Y buttons are all purple. So a very important thing to note is that when the units are on, there's this LED light on the top, and it's very visible on the translucent model. As you can see, the gray and white ones, you can barely see them, but this is in very bright conditions, and in darker lighting, they'll look even brighter. In fact, the translucent models kind of spread the light through the shell and makes it look even bigger than it is. Another interesting thing to note is that the light hole is different between them too. The white model holes are larger than the gray model. It might be that they changed the design as they manufacture them. Anyways, while you can't really see them here, I noticed that for the translucent models, you can also see the light from the front of the device while in dark room. It doesn't bother me much, but I'm sure it will bother some people. Okay, so let's go over the popular firmware options, starting with the stock firmware. So you have these 4 main menus. Game is where you can choose the system you want. I'll choose FC, which is Famicom, or the NES games for us in the US. These are the actual ROMs that come in the 128GB card. They're sorted kind of weird and there's some weird fake games on here, but this is all changeable. Let's go out and you can see there's a lot more systems playable. Here's the settings menu where you can control the brightness, Wi-Fi settings, and even change the screen color parameters. There's also a lot of fun themes built in you can try. So let's choose this random game, Street Fighter 12. Definitely a weird ROM hack or fake game. I guess if you really want Street Fighter on the NES though, here it is. So you can hit the menu button in any game and it brings up the options menu for saving and loading states. The native menu will load the RetroArch menu if you really want to customize the emulator. In general, a pretty easy firmware to use that lets you customize some things by getting into the weeds of RetroArch. The only problem with the stock firmware is that it isn't updated often. As far as I know, they never update it again, which is why community-made firmware comes into play. And the most popular community firmware is probably OnionOS. It uses a similar 4-icon main menu, but the RetroArch menu is replaced with favorites. There are a lot more apps that you can use and they're easily installable over the Wi-Fi. The settings menu looks very similar to the stock one too. The game menu is also the same, showing all the systems you can play. The main difference is how the menu button works in OnionOS though. Pressing it will open up a full screen menu of save state screenshots for your last played games. You can choose one and it'll start right where you left off. When you press the menu button again, it'll automatically create a save state and screenshot, and you can switch games or go back into your previous game anytime. This also does the same saving and loading when you power down the system and start it back up. Another great thing about OnionOS is that it has a bunch of hotkeys and button combos already set up, as you can see from the startup guide that's built in. It also is the only firmware that has a dedicated rewind hotkey. You still have to turn it on in the RetroArch menus because it can cause slowdown on certain systems, but it's a great feature to have for those really difficult retro games. The last firmware I want to talk about is MinUI, or in this case DotUI, because when I set this up, MinUI was not being worked on. But they're essentially the same thing, and MinUI is actually back in development now. I have to turn this one on because it automatically shuts off after a time to save battery life. This is a great feature that makes it simple to just toss in your pocket without having to manually shut it down. It'll automatically save the game and load it too if you're in the middle of a game. This is actually the simplest firmware of the three and a great candidate for people who don't need a lot of features or don't want to tinker with too many settings. As you can see, it's all just text-based lists, which is also great for people who get easily overwhelmed with tech. This one is a bit limited in the systems it can play compared to OnionOS, but it has most of the popular ones, just like the stock firmware. To play a game, just choose your system, and then choose the game from the list of ROMs it shows. Once in-game, the menu button opens up a simple menu similar to the stock firmware again, although this one is a little nicer to look at in my opinion. You can save or load the state of a game here, and it'll show a screenshot of what you saved or are going to load. Much like the stock firmware, there's an advanced menu, but this doesn't open up RetroArch, and instead shows a very streamlined list of settings that you can change. Most of the important stuff is here though, but I did notice there's no rewind function at all here. That's pretty much it for this video. Hopefully it helps you make a choice on color and the firmware you might want to try. I'll leave links in the description for where you can find the different firmwares. Most of them are pretty easy to set up if you follow the instructions on the page, but feel free to leave a comment if you need help or want more info. Until next time.